All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I don't know how it is where you are, but it hasn't stopped raining here for 2 days. So kind of nice to be talking about outdoorsy stuff and thinking about being outside when it's kind of not so nice to be outside at the moment. So I wanted to start with a little bit of introduction. There's a couple of familiar faces on the call today. So hi to those I know. For those who don't know me, my name's Ali Wines. I'm the owner and principal advisor at Uncommon Ground. And Uncommon Ground is kind of the new name for something I've been doing for quite a while now. We use evidence-based communication strategies to help organizations achieve their sustainability goals. And that's really important because sustainability just doesn't happen in isolation. It's something that we need to do in partnership with our customers and our communities and the world around us. And communication plays a really key role in that. So this is me. That's my face. I have been doing this kind of work for coming up to around 20 years now, as scary as that is to say. I've worked all around the world with companies in Australia, in the US, in the UK, and now here where I live in Canada as well. I took a brief break from running my own business. I had a fantastic opportunity to be able to lead Protect Our Winters Canada. And now that I'm back doing what I've always done, I guess I'm really excited to be able to bring everything I learned and my experiences and relationships from that time into my work with clients and to help them talk about sustainability in ways that are really productive. So what's on the cards for today? I'm going to spend some time talking about a study that we conducted in sort of early January, February this year, some consumer research survey and some sort of additional wider research into the world of sustainability communications and what's being done well, being maybe done not so well around the world. And then I really want to spend some time diving into what does that mean for you? What does that mean for your clients, your customers? How can we use this information to make a difference in the world and to operate in a way that sort of really aligns with our values? I'm going to try and keep my talking bit to about 40 minutes. I want to leave plenty of time at the end for Q&A. I'm hoping I can let you go a little early today, but I've also allowed an extra 15 minutes at the end if anybody has really burning questions that they want to chat through. I'm happy to make that time. So let's get into it. What I really wanted to know with this survey was, what do outdoor consumers really, think about? What do they care about when they're making purchases? How much do they care about the planet? And do these values translate to their purchasing decisions? I'm going to skip over the methodology piece if you're kind of a real data scientist type and you want to talk about how we did the survey. I'm very happy to answer questions, but I want to leave time to get into the good stuff. So we had about 137 respondents to the survey. So relatively small sample size. But what you'll see, and I'll talk about this a bit further on, is that the results are really reflective of similar studies that have been done on very large scales around the world. So we had about 75% of folks coming from here in North America, both Canada and the US, but we also touched on the UK, Europe, Asia, interestingly, and a fairly sizable chunk from Australia, which probably not surprising given that's my background. In terms of demographics, a pretty good split across the board, I think. We had slightly more female than male respondents, but not by a lot. And then a fairly good spread across the age brackets there as well. Last thing to note is that the folks who responded tended to be a pretty educated bunch. You can see a whole lot of degrees there. And I think that's perhaps reflective of maybe the fact of people who respond to surveys, but also the fact that access to the outdoors probably does come with a certain amount of privilege, and that's often aligned with education as well. What we could also see from the survey is that the people who responded are pretty into their hobbies. They are doing these activities, the majority are getting outdoors multiple times a week. And the key interest areas were hiking and backpacking, followed pretty closely by skiing and snowboarding, and a fair few for camping as well, which is kind of not overly surprising. I think aligns pretty closely with the hiking and backpacking side of things. So the first question we asked on the survey was about people's level of climate concern. How worried are they about the changes that we're starting to see in the world around us? And they're really worried, like a lot. So when we asked them to rate their level of concern on a scale of 0 to 10, as you can see from the chart, it's all up the top end, with the majority responding at the highest possible level, a 10. And the thing that I think is really interesting here is that really there's kind of statistically minimal responses below an 8. So we're talking to an audience who's really worried about climate change. And what I think this does is it actually creates a really fantastic opportunity for brands to demonstrate leadership in this space and to win hearts and to really connect with their consumers on a deeper level, with talking about the issues that are of concern to them. So I'll dive a little bit more into the results of the survey. Oops, a little slow to click through. The story that the survey tells us is this: sustainability matters to outdoor consumers more than it doesn't. So we've got 54% of people saying that sustainability is a very important factor in their purchasing decisions. And people really expect to see brands mirroring that. They really want to see the companies that they're purchasing from take a real leadership role in talking about climate and talking about sustainability. But that's where we're starting to see things fall apart a little bit. Brands are not so good at that. They're struggling to communicate their impact. We see that consumers have a really hard time comparing brands on sustainability performance, and they don't really believe brands when they are talking about the sustainability of their products and their values. So that's a real challenge that is going to be important to overcome. So what we see here is, overall, you've got 95% of survey respondents saying that sustainability is a factor in their purchasing decision. For some, it's really important. It might be their primary consideration. And for others, they're going to be thinking about other issues as well, but it's still something that they consider. The other really important thing to note is we asked people on a sliding scale whether cost is more important to them, the price of a product, or whether sustainability is more important. We are seeing a slight tip towards sustainability, but cost is still a really critical factor for people. And, in this economy, that's not surprising at all. And it's really important that we continue to remember that and continue to support consumers with that aspect of their decision making. So what are their primary areas of concern? I'm just going to touch on the top 3 here. You're all going to get a copy of this report and a copy of today's recording as well, so you can kind of digest through a bit more in your own time if you would like to do that. Overwhelmingly, though, people stated that product durability was the area of sustainability that matters most to them. And I think that's really not surprising for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's really easy to see if I can pick up something and turn it over in my hands and say, this is well made. I think this is going to last me a long time. It kind of really bridges that cost and sustainability equation that I'm trying to balance in my head. So I think that's a really key one. Recycled materials was the other one. And I think maybe for a similar reason, recycling is something we've all been doing for a while now. It's pretty easy to understand this idea that if my product has more recycled materials in it, less new stuff went into making it, there's less waste in the world, and it kind of makes me feel good about my decisions to recycle as well. Point 3 was a really interesting one for me. I'm not sure I expected this to rate so highly. but consumers really value brands that offer a repair program. So if you do work in the product space and this is something that you're not doing yet and you're thinking about doing, it's definitely something to maybe chew on a little bit. Um, I think it really speaks to the company having sustainability embedded in their values. As a consumer, I can look at a brand with a repair program and I think, well, actually, they're not just trying to sell me the next new thing. They really stand by the quality of their products and they want me to have this for a really long time. So we'll come back to some of these touch points a little bit more when we talk about the insights and what you can start to do with this information. What is it that consumers expect from brands? Um, these two charts are a little bit similar, so kind of a quick point of differentiation. The first question you see on the left, do you think outdoor brands should be communicating about the environment and sustainability, is really about how the brand talks kind of in that one-on-one way with its customers, guiding and educating them, helping them to make category-related choices about sustainability. And the second chart on the right is about how the brand shows up in the community and the work that it does to advocate for solutions more broadly. So that might be advocating to protect public lands or running a Get Out the Vote campaign, really kind of showing up and being a community leader in that environment and sustainability space. And as you can see, the expectations are really pretty high. So 88%, nearly 90% of respondents expect brands to be communicating about the environment and sustainability with them. And an additional 10% would like that, but they only really want to hear about things that related specifically to the brand and the products that they're looking at about purchasing. So still really high and an interesting breakdown there, I think. And then only a slightly smaller percentage, still over 3/4 of respondents, really want brands to be those community leaders and to be out there pushing for change in the world. And that aligns with some interesting further research, which I'm going to tell you about shortly. I wanted to share this slide with you because I thought it was really interesting. We asked people who responded to the survey to tell us which brands they think are the most sustainable, which outdoor brands, and we didn't give them a list. So these brands that you see here are ones that people are independently thinking of and that come to mind when they think about sustainability. And I think that's a really important thing to note because despite what is a little bit of skepticism out there, there are brands that are doing a good job of cutting through the noise and building sustainability into their reputations. Um, we did ask people not to mention Patagonia, and that was purely because they do such a good job that even people who aren't closely aligned with the outdoor industry tend to name Patagonia as a sustainability leader. So we didn't want those results to be wildly skewed. Where things start to get tricky is that consumers are confused. So they find it really hard to compare brands on sustainability. You can see from this chart that the weighted average for people responding to this question is 3.63 out of 10. So really low. It's the vast majority, over 70% of consumers are having a really difficult to impossible time comparing brands. And I think probably most of us can identify with that. You know, how do I know if a 10 tree is better than a Patagonia? How do I know if this t-shirt made with organic cotton is better than the one made with recycled materials? It just requires so much an effort and research to be able to answer those questions that it can make things really difficult for people. The trouble for brands is that that level of confusion is really eroding trust. So we asked people to give a star rating to brands for their sustainability performance, and they got just over 2.5 stars, so barely a pass. I don't think many of us would be super stoked about seeing a movie that was only rated 2.5 stars. And it's kind of the same. The value in the face there is really low. And a very similar result when they were asked about brand sustainability communications. they really just don't think they're particularly authentic. They're having a hard time believing the information that we're putting out there. I've pulled some quotes here from the survey that came out in the freeform field. I'll let you again kind of read through these and digest them in your own time, but they really reflect what the numbers show. So people are saying, you know, make it easy for us to know who's doing good so we can be informed before making a purchase. And to provide context, you know, it's no good to me to hear that the garment is made with 20% recycled material. What's the benchmark? Is 20% good or bad? And I think that's a really reasonable question. That's a really hard thing for people to know. What's important to remember as brands and as companies who talk to consumers on a regular basis is that these people want to hear from us. They're actually really reliable. They're really hungry, sorry, for reliable information. And this maybe speaks a little bit to some of the challenges we're seeing in the media at the moment. It's hard to know who to trust out there and what's a reliable source. So it's really interesting that consumers want to hear from brands on this really wide range of topics. Yes, things that relate directly to their relationship with the brand, like care and repair of products, but also broader topics. They want to hear about climate change. They want to hear about environmental advocacy. So yeah, again, I think this is a really great opportunity for companies to deepen their relationships with consumers and to demonstrate their shared values across these areas. So I'm not the only one who was curious about these questions. There's a lot of research out there with, you know, very, very large sample sizes done globally, looking at consumer perceptions of sustainability. And I wanted to just pull out a couple of these for you because I think they kind of pretty closely mirror what we're seeing in this survey. So the big one, I think, is that consumers believe that brands have as much responsibility as governments to create positive environmental change. And that's huge. You know, not long ago, I think brands were just seen, the relationship with companies and brands was seen as purely transactional. You bought stuff from them, they made money, end of story. And that's really no longer the case. I think people are becoming much more savvy and they understand that consumption does have an impact on our environment, and they expect the brands they buy from to acknowledge and address that. Over the past 5 years, there's been a 71% rise in online searches for sustainable goods, and 72% of people are reporting that they're actively buying more environmentally friendly products than they did 5 years ago. So the demand is absolutely out there and it's growing. I wanted to talk too about a little bit of the research that's being done around attitudes towards sustainability and climate change. And this is really critical because we have this sense that we're living in an incredibly polarized world. We see a lot of division on social media, in traditional media. And so we think that, you know, we're kind of constantly butting heads on these issues. But actually, that's not the case. A huge study was done recently, last year, I think, with about 200,000 people across 192 countries. So, absolutely massive bit of research. And what that found was that 86% of people around the world agree that people in their country should try to fight climate change. So, we're way more aligned than we think we are. Where I think maybe the confusion comes in is that we just don't talk about it enough. So another study showed that in Canada and the US, less than half the population hears about climate on at least a weekly basis. And so if you're not hearing about it, you're kind of missing out on those opportunities for connection and unity. Where I think this starts to matter for organizations in the outdoor industry is how we think about our reputation. You know, and this is really important. Brands live and die by their reputation, and they're understandably really nervous about getting negative comments on social media about kind of polarizing or exposing those divisions in their audience. And one stat that I wanted to highlight is that 25% of all negative comments on social media about climate are from bots. Well, that's huge. That's a quarter of those comments. And yes, it is still a negative comment and it can be hard to differentiate if it comes from a bot or a troll farm or whatever. But what I think information like this does allow us to do is to plan our communications in a cool-headed fashion and respond to these comments and perceived divisions in a way that's just a little bit less reactive and a little bit calmer, in a way that brings us together as an audience rather than stokes those fires. So cool. We've got all of this great information. We know that people want sustainability information. We know that they want to purchase sustainable products. How do we help them to actually get there? So what I did was good old-fashioned SWOT analysis to kind of think about what is it that the data really tells us here. And on the positive side, the outdoor industry has this really eager and really receptive audience who want to hear about sustainability issues. But ad hoc, inconsistent, confusing communications make it really hard for them to trust what they're hearing right now. And what this is causing is a loss of trust in the brand and in what the brands are telling us. Another little point that I've included here, and I'm happy to chat further about it offline, is just the consideration for some of the regulations that are coming down at the moment. We're seeing a lot coming out of Europe, but also here in Canada, about the claims that brands can and can't make around their sustainability to try and get ahead of some of the greenwashing that we're seeing from, I guess, some of the more nefarious players out there. So that's kind of the unfun stuff, I suppose. But what all of this adds up to is some really fantastic opportunities for the outdoor industry to build that trust and loyalty with consumers and to really differentiate themselves with authentic and transparent sustainability communication. And what that leads to is brand growth, right? If people trust you, they want to buy your product, it allows you to have more of that reach that, that most brands are looking for. And to really do that through building deeper customer relationships, deeper community relationships, using meaningful and values-based conversations to do that. So how do we start to do this? I think the really key thing to remember is keep it simple. Keep sustainability messaging short. We all have, unfortunately, goldfish attention span these days. We have so many demands on our time, on our attention, constant bombardment of messages. So keeping things really short, not making it a scientific piece that you can publish in the Nature Journal, something that consumers can digest really easily, and something that's simple. Make it so a 6-year-old could understand it. And I think that's a really great rule of thumb for communications generally. If you can't explain your idea to a 6-year-old, you're probably not explaining it very well at all. So it's a really good kind of little measure there to test yourself against. The other really important piece of that is tell me why. We want this information. Tell me why it matters. And what I've included here for you is just a few examples of brands that I think do these things really well. And one comes from Outer Known. A lot of you are probably familiar with them. They make organic cotton clothing products. And I wanted to just read to you one of the pieces that they had on their website about a particular shirt. It says, organic cotton cuts out harmful synthetic chemicals used to grow conventional cotton, making for safer working conditions for farmers and a healthier planet. One sentence, so simple. I absolutely understand now why it is that I should make this choice. It's not some kind of ethereal out there reason of doing good for something maybe. I really closely understand what it is that making this purchase is going to do, what good it's going to add to the world. The other thing I really like is rating systems. And there are a few considerations here. We know that customers do like eco-labeling. They like to know when something's got, a B Corp certification or it's Blue Sign approved. That does help them to make the sustainable choice. But what we're starting to see is that there's such a proliferation of these labels that it's actually adding to the confusion. And it's adding to, just more and more decisions that people have to go through, more information that they need to have stored to be able to make them. How do you necessarily know if Rainforest Alliance is better than Fair Trade certified, or, is a B Corp better than a green label business? So what I like is really simple systems like the one that they use at booking.com, which is, if you've ever seen it, it's just three little green leaves and it lets you know how sustainable a particular accommodation provider is. And that really supports the purchasing decision. I can look at two hotels and they might be fairly similar on price, but one's got two green leaves and the other has one. Makes it a really easy decision for me to think about where I want to book. And it's absolutely possible for brands of all kinds, whether you are a product-based business, whether you're a guiding outfitter, you can look at your operations and give yourselves these little ratings. It does require a bit of bravery. It requires a bit of honesty because there's naturally going to be some that are less sustainable than the other. That's normal, but it really helps consumers. And the other critical piece of it is it really builds trust because all of a sudden they believe you because you're telling them, hey, this product's really great. This one's also good, but XYZ. The other big piece is talk about what you did, talk about what you've already done. And we've all been in this situation. We've all been around people, I think maybe especially in the outdoor industry, that talk a huge game about what they're going to do. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And you see it, I think especially now that we're progressing towards 2030, huge amount of claims of we're going to be we're going to be net zero by 2030 without any evidence to back it up. I don't know how you're going to do that. You're not showing me the steps that you're going to take. You're not showing me the gap between where you are now and what you need to do to get there. So by talking about what you've done now, you're really kind of again just cementing that trust with people. And if you haven't done much, that's okay. Say that. It's really important. And you can let consumers know what you plan to do. So long as those plans are really specific, it makes them it makes it easy for them to understand what the steps are that you're going to take. The last three, I think, kind of all tie in together a little bit. Storytelling is such a critical part of this. And, ironically, I have a fact that tells you that stories are more memorable than facts. But what people say is that the human brain retains stories 22 times better than it retains data. So if you can really show people what you're doing rather than, throwing a bunch of numbers at them, it becomes really memorable for folks. Um, and the more personal you make those stories, the more you make it relatable to people's day-to-day lives, and the more that you make them authentic, the more memorable and effective those stories are going to be. A really important part of that is bringing the issue close to the person. Human beings, the cynical view would be that we're a little bit selfish. We like to think about things that affect us individually. It's probably true. But we also just have a hard time understanding really big external problems. So rather than talking about the planet, if we can talk about our future, our health, our communities, that really brings the challenges home to the consumer and what they're seeing in their day-to-day lives. I want to talk a little bit about the values action gap. And this is really important. I think people often, or the idea is that people will respond to a survey like this and say all the good things. Yes, sustainability really matters to me. Yes, I would be happy to spend more to buy the more sustainable product. But then when it's just them and the privacy of their living room and the online checkout, do they make a different decision? Do they tend to vote a bit more with their wallets? And that is something that happens, but I think it's also something that's perhaps overly relied on by some of the executives that we see and speak with who are perhaps a little bit reluctant to invest in sustainability initiatives in their business, because price is a really easy
comparator. If I can look at two things that are otherwise identical and they're different prices, it makes my choice very easy. And it also is a pretty easy kind of substitute for value. You know, I can think about whether something might be a little bit more expensive, maybe it's a better quality product. So it's just something that we're very used to using as a comparator. What we can do is to make the sustainable choice just as easy. All the research that we've talked about points to consumers wanting to make these sustainable choices, but it's up to us to help them to do it. So how? We've spoken a little bit about that durability point that scored so highly in the survey. So talking about how long something will last really bridges that cost sustainability gap. Telling the story about it. This is Fred with his Yeti mug that's lasted 20 years, really kind of makes that memorable, makes it stick in people's minds. The other thing, and we talked about keeping things short and simple. It's the same. So we know that people make 32,000 decisions every single day. Our brains hit decision fatigue long before we're ready to go to bed at night. So we have to really smooth that decision-making process for people with simple claims. Really highly visual cues is really important. And again, what's in it for me? Linking these claims that we're making, and I don't actually like the word claims because it sounds like kind of you're bullshitting people. But making these statements really personal to the person. Talk about, for example, you might say this product is made without harmful chemicals, so you can enjoy the outdoors safely. All of a sudden, I feel like, hey, this brand's looking after my health, as well as making it easy for me to get outside. You still have to have a really good product. Consumers want to know that the product or service is outstanding in its category. Sustainability comes second. So your category claim might be camp meals that actually taste great. And then you can pair it with a sustainability claim. And it's organic and it comes from local farms. And all of a sudden, as a consumer, I'm like, oh, I'm getting the thing I want. And I kind of feel good about buying it, It gives me that little pep in my step because I've done something good for the world. The last piece that I want to touch on is about being the solution. Consumers are really unsure whether their actions make a difference. And I really feel this one personally. What does it matter whether I'm rinsing out my jam jar or, buying the organic raspberries when Imperial Oil's dumping a bunch of pollutants into the Athabasca River? It's so hard to feel like what you can do as an individual actually makes a difference. But it does make a difference. And the reason for that is that it's not just about buying a sustainable product that's a little bit better for the world. It's about creating that wave of movement that tips the scales of the way that we approach complex problems, and making us think about, sustainability first when we're doing that. And we can only do that when there's a real tide of consumer support. So it's really about showing that you're part of that wave, that you're part of that kind of change making process. And a really good way to do that is just to provide that context that people are looking for. Show how your sustainable product makes an impact. My one t-shirt, hiking boots, whatever, may not feel like a huge difference, but if you can tell consumers, hey, this year we kept 128 tons of plastic out of the ocean. That's huge for people. And I know for smaller brands that can actually be, a little bit tricky sometimes. You may not necessarily have a sustainability advisor on staff who can calculate those numbers for you. I know that can be hard, but there are ways of talking about that without having to rely on raw numbers. There's lots of things you can do that are still honest, still full of integrity, tell the story in a powerful way. So the critical thing is don't make shit up, but to provide that context and let people know how their positive decision is part of a whole wave of positive decisions that are happening out there. So I'm going to leave it there. I wanted to just sum up with a few final thoughts about what it is that this research is telling us and what we can do. I think the things that I would love for you to take away from today are the fact that outdoor consumers want to be sustainable. They are really craving the ability to make these choices easily. But right now, they're confused and a little bit skeptical. So, what we can really do as leaders in this industry is to build trust, is to encourage those sustainable choices with simple and authentic communications. And the last big one is you've got to commit to the send. I think too often we see companies that tack sustainability on as part of their marketing strategy and don't think about it the rest of the time. And consumers are really alive to that. You know, people aren't dumb. They can see whether sustainability is something that you really walk the talk on. So making it a core brand value in everything that you do is really going to shine through. So that's it from me. I want to invite you guys to ask me any burning questions that you might have. And I want to see if I can unmute you. This is where my tech skills kind of fall apart. I think you can unmute yourselves. If you can't, please wave at me in the chat, or feel free to pop questions in the chat if you're not a public talky kind of person as well.
Hi, Allie. I'm a little bit late, so if you already covered this, I apologize. Um, I guess, and I know that you talked a little bit about authenticity. I guess I'm curious your thoughts about greenwashing because I feel like, I mean, in every industry and maybe the outdoor industry too, like can you touch on greenwashing a little bit and maybe how it can be avoided or maybe like what it means in the outdoor industry or like how like maybe as a consumer or as a fellow brand like how you can detect it?
Oh, that's such a great question. Yeah, I think kind of big promises without backup are a pretty sure sign of greenwashing. And it's something we probably see all the time, you know. I'm trying to think of a good example off the top of my head, but something like, you know, just saying this product is sustainable or slapping an eco-friendly label on something without actually showing the consumer what it is that makes that eco-friendly. That's when I think my kind of little radar starts to go off. Um, in terms of avoiding it, I think it really comes back to that authenticity. And one of the traps I think really good, you know, well intended brands can fall into is getting so excited about wanting to be sustainable. And so they start to tell this story and they talk about what they're going to do and they start using terms like eco friendly or organic or recycled before they're really ready. So that kind of being really transparent and honest about where you're at in your journey and what you still have to do is critical. And one of the things I think, you know, the absolute best communicators who do in this space is to talk about where you got things wrong. It's so powerful to do that. Um, an example I didn't give earlier, but that I love is there's a Canadian brand called Free Label. And a little bit similar to Outer Known, they make organic cotton clothing products. And they reached a point where demand for their products was so strong that they were going to have to dramatically scale their business in order to meet that demand. And so the owner put out this really fantastic piece just talking about how this posed a dilemma for her as a values led business owner because she wanted to meet her customers' demands. She wanted to grow the business. She appreciated their support. But she also recognized that scaling was going to mean that she would have to adopt a lot more, I guess, industrial style processes to make the clothes, which is a lot less sustainable. And so she just shared this, and it was a really great way to educate her consumers about, you know, the challenges that she faced as a small business owner. And I think it built a lot of trust in her brand because she didn't say that she had all the answers. She just said it was something that she was going to have to spend time thinking about. And I really enjoyed that. I think the post is on her website. The brand's called Free Labels. So feel free to check it out. And if I can find it, I'll try and send a link out as well. Does that answer your question, Margot?
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a great example. And I live in Missoula, Montana, and there's a gal here, and her brand is national, but Mallory from Ewer, she has a little facility, well, it's bigger now in Montana, and she makes her clothes out of recycled plastic bottles. And her whole Instagram is about like basically all the stuff that like goes wrong because she's trying to produce in the US, she's trying to use like local sustainable materials. And I think the reason that her following is so like loyal, like is because people are just like, everyone feels like they're in it together. Like we're trying to you know, create this awesome sustainable pair of like yoga pants or dresses or whatever. And I think that it kind of creates, yeah, like a big community. And it sounds like that's kind of what, you know, the brand from your example is creating too. And I think that, yeah, being honest about it. So thanks for sharing that example. That's awesome.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so key. And we're all like a little bit afraid to be vulnerable, I think, and to say that we don't have the answers. But actually, it's such a fantastic way to build that trust and closer relationships with people. So, yeah, I love that. I've got a couple of questions in the chat that I'm going to get to. So, Lindsay is asking, I'm wondering if you've seen trends within specific segments of the outdoor industry, like more concern about sustainability for more technical niches like climbing or skiing versus more general things like hiking or camping or vice versa. Yeah, that's a really interesting question, Lindsay. I think what I probably see is that the areas where people that are maybe a little bit higher barrier to entry and that you kind of have to be a pretty dedicated outdoor enthusiast to get into. So maybe that skiing or especially kind of backcountry skiing and snowboarding or climbing where you have to have a lot of skill and network to be able to get out there and do that. I would say perhaps the concern is a little higher in those areas. Um, that's purely anecdotal. I don't have evidence to back that up, but it's just something that I would say I observe with the people and the companies that I work with. But interestingly, I think too, we're starting to see a greater level of awareness in people, whether they're outdoor industry or not. So there's been a big push to take PFAs out of tent material because they've been shown to be toxic to people. And I think that's something that, you know, even folks who aren't maybe dedicated outdoorsy backpacking types, but just want to car camp with their kids, you know, they're starting to be more cognizant of issues like that as well. And, you know, the product makeup, is this made from synthetic fibers? Is it made from natural fibers? There's a lot more awareness across the board about some of those issues as well. I can see I've got a couple more questions in the chat, and then Jessica, I can see your hand up, so don't let me forget to come back to you. Okay, nope, that was it. Beth's just popping offline. Thank you so much, Beth, for coming. Jessica, go for it.
Hi, Allie.
Hi.
Thank you for all of this. This is super helpful. Margot and I were DMing back and forth that this is all really interesting info that we didn't know a lot of. So thrilled to be here. The couple things that stood out to me were the durability piece. That's really good to know that that's, I guess the consumers are connecting that, but also that that's an important piece to play up. And then also your mention of being open and vulnerable. I feel like that's come up several times and feels like a really big takeaway. I was wondering specifically, so I started working last month for a merino wool clothing company, and we're all about sustainability and doing the right thing, but I think our communication is pretty lacking on it. But I was curious, you had mentioned the how it's helpful to kind of put things in context. Of one of the comments that you had gotten was, is 20% good or bad? And I'm curious if you have any suggestions on where to go to get those benchmarks. Are there groups that do like global kind of info? Is it more country based? Any recommendations for where to go to even see how we start to stack up?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think a good place to go is often industry groups and industry associations.
Hmm.
So you might look at agricultural or merino farming groups to be able to get some of that
Hmm.
data. You could
Cool.
look a little bit at what competitors are doing as well, and that kind of gives you
Hmm.
the broad context, even if you can't say, you know, we've got 70% healthier sheep than whoever.
True, true.
Yeah, so I think kind of looking for that context in other ways is probably key, but I'd start there.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, thank you again.
Yeah, of course, no problem. Any other questions? Okay, well, I'm happy to give you all a little bit of time back in your day. Um, I just wanted to reiterate that, you can probably tell from the way I talk about it, but I'm really passionate about this stuff. I really believe in the power of companies to make a difference and to be a force for good in the world. So I'm always happy to be a resource for any of you. Just feel free to drop me a note, hit me up with an email or on social media. I'm happy to answer questions or just bounce a few ideas around. It's not about doing paid work with you. I just want to try and help the friends and the companies that I work with to make a difference out there. So don't be shy about asking any questions. And yes, I will absolutely share the presentation. Thanks for asking, Jessica, and I'll share a link to the recording as well if you'd like to go back and digest it or share it with other folks in your industry. That's fine as well. That will come from a link through Eventbrite. I belatedly discovered that it won't let me download people's emails. I guess they don't want us to be spammy. So just watch out for that Eventbrite link, but I'll be sending that in the next few days. Oh, and a great comment from Alyssa in the chat as well. She said previously the Sustainable Apparel Coalition is another good resource to benchmark. Great suggestion, Alyssa. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I've really enjoyed doing this research. I've learned a lot doing it, and I'm really glad to be able to share some of this information with you. I'm so glad it was helpful. And everybody have a fantastic weekend.
Thank you, Allie.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.